And as brothers and sisters in Christ, we have been gifted to not only spread the gospel, but to encourage one another, to build one another up, to create a healthy body that reflects Christ as our head. And then we can go into a world with a healthy understanding of what it looks like to be male and female together.
Well, hey, listeners, man, am I pumped that you are here with us for another episode of Church Chat. We have an awesome conversation because this podcast is all about having conversations about ministry that you wish you were having. These are the real conversations about what it's like in ministry and what we can all learn from them. And today we have an amazing guest lined up. I'm so pumped for this conversation. But before we get to that, my name is Josh and I'm one of your hosts.
And I'm Emily, and today's guest is the Director of Spiritual Formation at Hershey Free. And for better or worse, she is kind of the token women in ministry person for our Eastern District of the EFCA. Deb Hinkel, welcome to Church
Welcome,
Chat.
Deb.
Oh, I'm so happy to be with you guys and just looking forward to this conversation.
So are we.
For those of you that aren't part of our district, we are all part of the EFCA East, Eastern District. And we're glad you're listening to this, even if you're not part of our kind of like fam. We're excited about this conversation.
And we like to introduce our guests even further by allowing them to play a little game to lie. We encourage that.
Why
here
not?
On the podcast.
Let's start
That's
it right.
Awesome. I'm so glad you guys. That's great.
So take it away with your two truths and a lie.
All right, so here we go. I played varsity basketball for 4 years in high school. I got my doctorate from Lancaster Bible College and Capital Seminary. And I was engaged 2 months after my first date.
Those are all, I hope they're all true. I know that they're not, but man, that's awesome.
I lose at this all the time.
I know, I am
not
the big
all
winner.
the time, but overall, you have been cleaning it up. I don't know, man. Like, I feel like Deb could shoot some hoops.
I do too, but I could also see her maybe like doing volleyball or something like that. And
There's not a lot of 4-year varsity athletes though. And unless you go to like small school, a lot of times it's hard to break. So like, I don't know. That one kind of threw me. Like, I'm not sure if she got her doctorate from LBC either.
Can you get a doctorate from LBC? Although she did say like it's in conjunction with a seminary. So
yeah, idea.
Okay, go.
I think I'm gonna say varsity b-ball 4 years is a lie. What do you think, Emily?
I am gonna go the doctorate one.
Okay, what is it, Deb?
It's the doctorate one.
Wow, you gotta be kidding me.
Man.
That's because you can get a doctorate from LBC and Capital Seminary. Once Capital Seminary became part of the umbrella of LBC's graduate education, you can. I just don't even have a doctorate. I only have a master's degree.
I was like, man, I wish, because I would have loved to introduce you as Dr. Deb. So
you are so smart. I never even considered that one as an option.
I know.
By the time I would have wanted to get my doctorate, I was so immersed in ministry, I didn't want to take time away from doing the ministry.
So you played some hoops, huh?
I did.
That's awesome.
For 4 years in high school, and
I wasn't throw it down anymore.
No, I used to play with my kids. I'd do horse and all that kind of stuff. I have 3 boys, so I would play that in the driveway.
Well, we are super excited to jump into this topic.
Yes.
Maybe another one with a little bit of fear and trepidation, because it can be a contentious topic, but
it shouldn't be, especially in the EFCA, where we all kind of agree to a statement of faith and making the main things. But it can be, and unfortunately, it sometimes is.
It certainly is.
Yeah. So we're going to dive into women in ministry. And Deb, I would love to hear kind of your journey. Did you always want to be in vocational ministry? I'm only familiar with you working at Hershey and doing what you're doing now, but I'm sure there is a whole history of how you got there. So tell us about that.
I always loved ministry. That is true. Even as a child, I can remember being involved in a church plant with my parents when I was probably 10 or 11. And I always knew I was a leader. And so I I guess you could say I was probably bossy, because most kids who are leaders when they're kids are just bossy, But I think there was a stirring in me about ministry, but I have to be honest with you. I pretty much dismissed that pretty quickly. And the reason for that was, as I was growing up, I didn't see any models of women in any kind of leadership roles within the church. And so I never really considered that as an option in terms of educational experience or pursuing it in that way. So I didn't go to a Bible college. I didn't go to an institution where I could have been trained for ministry, because I didn't think it was an option. So I went to a school, though, that had a really, really strong campus ministry. I went to Millersville University and was very involved in InterVarsity. And the thing about InterVarsity, even when I was in college, they were more egalitarian. We weren't necessarily using the term, but they really embraced men and women together in ministry. And that model was really, really helpful for me, just mentally, to think about it might be okay for me to serve as a leader in ministry in some way, shape, or form. I think that laid a foundation for my desire to be in ministry. And then I met my husband, and yes, we were engaged 2 months after our first date. I met him, and we were both on the InterVarsity Executive Council. And there was definitely some hierarchical thinking, because a woman would not have been elected as the president of the council. So he was the president and I was the vice president. so that was convenient.
Yeah, very.
And then God called him to go to seminary, and he went to Trinity and got his MDiv. And so I remember, as a young wife, thinking, all right, so maybe this stirring that I had, even as a child and a teenager, was because I was going to marry somebody who was going to be in full-time ministry, and that's how we would partner together. But something else happened there too. So Dr. Walter Kaiser, he's definitely a language specialist, Hebrew, not Greek as much, but definitely Hebrew and Old Testament. He was my husband's advisor and one of the profs at Trinity. And I remember distinctly one weekend, we went on a speaking engagement with him. And there were 2 wives, I think, who went along, and then the other guys were his advisees. And we got into this discussion. And Walt Kaiser said he did not see anything specifically that would prohibit women from being involved in leading and teaching roles in the church. It almost gave me a relief. It almost gave me the sense of, okay, what I'm thinking about is not unrealistic. That was part of my early journey and just thinking through the issue. And it actually caused me to begin to do a lot of reading on the topic.
Okay, I want to come back eventually to like some of the influential things that you've read, because I would love to know those. But your position now, it's a director role. It's a higher leadership role at Hershey. And I would say the majority of women in leadership don't ever break that glass ceiling of leadership. Can you talk about maybe some of the challenges in breaking that ceiling, and maybe how you did that?
If I can be honest, I look at that as a long journey. I feel like Eugene Peterson, he wrote a book called A Long Obedience in the Same Direction, right?
Yeah.
And it feels like it was a long journey that was going in the same direction. But it started with the first ministry position I had, which was not in a free church. And it was a position as the director of Christian education. I had been in that church and had been volunteering for probably 8 or 9 years. And through a series of events, I ended up being hired at that church as the full-time director of Christian education. For me, what has been my journey, my pathway, has been to earn respect. And my hope is that women in my generation, have paved enough ground that that's not as necessary as it once was. Because when I took that first position, one of the members on the team, it was a pretty good sized church. We had about 800 to 900 people. There were 5 of us on staff. I was the only female on staff, on the ministry staff. And the student ministry pastor at the time came to me and he said, I want you to know I didn't vote for you, because he was also an elder, because he said, I don't think a woman should be in this role. And unfortunately, only to tell me. Now, everybody else knew how he voted. I mean, the elders all knew that. To his credit, I don't remember the timing, maybe 2 years later, he came back to me and he said, I was wrong. So I give him kudos for that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was 2 years too slow, but okay.
Okay. But honestly, Josh, that has been the circumstances that many women have had to navigate in order to be able to do ministry. There, you have to, in a lot of ways, develop a thick skin. And I had the benefit of having a husband who didn't end up going into full-time ministry, but had been trained for it, and who was my biggest cheerleader. So I could come home and I could unload, which was really important to do that. What I had to learn is that everybody has a different line in the sand about what they believe about what women can and cannot do. I had to constantly learn how to navigate where that line might be for someone. And I always felt it, and this is not a bad thing because we all should be doing this anyway. I always felt like I really need to do my job with integrity. And it's got to be completely above board because, again, I had to earn the respect. It wasn't naturally given.
The church is very diverse in general. Even when you drill down into a specific denomination, even our denomination, any other denomination you want to pick, there's diversity within that denomination, especially in a denomination that has essentials that we agree to and non-essentials that there's freedom and grace that's supposed to be extended with. I get that people draw different lines in the sand based off of theology. The issue I have that really kind of bothers me is respect is something that should be given freely. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why that is something that's something that we can give each other even if we have different lines in the sand. I can respect you. I can show you respect regardless of your gender. I can show you respect no matter what your theological stance is. It's a way of showing practical love to somebody.
Well, and I think it was a parsing of, I will respect you as a person, but I'm not necessarily going to respect you in this role. You need to prove to me that I can respect how you function, what you do, how you think, how you lead, before I'm going to just assume that you will do a good job. So let me fast forward. Let me fast forward from that first position to the second one I had in church ministry, which would have been probably about 10 years later. So there's a gap in here of 10 years. And now I am coming into a free church. All right. And so I have a position that is respectable for women because it was the director of children's ministry. And as a side note, I had to be coaxed into that position because I like kids and I think children's ministry is absolutely foundational to discipleship and formation, but it's not my strong suit. However, and this was at Hershey, the then pastor of community life, I think he called me 4 times at least to ask me if I would apply for the job. And finally, he said to me, he goes, this is a leadership role. We need your voice. And you have 4 other staff members and a volunteer staff of almost 400. We need a strong leader. That's what convinced me to go.
It wasn't like children's ministry, like the majority of churches are smaller, like I think the national average is like 100 or something like that for churches. I mean, so it's not like just, 5 volunteers and 14 kids.
But here's the interesting thing. So I went, and I'm so glad I did, but another pastor was hired. We started within a month of each other. I started in May. He started in June. He was 15 years younger than me. And I had a master's degree at that point in time. I had a master's degree in ministry leadership. He had a master's degree as well. And I'm not sure what it was in, but we were somewhat comparable in our education. I had more life experience, but we had this very conversation, and I looked at him and I said, when I come in, because we were talking about the roles of women in ministry, I said, I really do have to earn people's respect. I said, you come in and you have to lose it because you already have it, because you're coming in as a male pastor and people are looking at you in a different way. And he absolutely agreed with me. Now,
Yeah, I'd agree with
I
that.
think there is I think that's beginning to change as more women are actually being trained in different ministry roles. And so I think there's been somewhat, I think maybe the balance is changing a little bit, that the scale is tipping. But I do think there are still some environments that you go in and women don't have the same voice. They don't have the same level of input with their voice.
So you mentioned the line. Okay. So I think there's two issues. There's the glass ceiling that women have a hard time breaking through, but there's also a sticky floor. Again, we're talking to people who have different theological thoughts on this, but wherever you set your theological line, there's going to be men who can push past that, no problem. Like, I can jump forward. I'm qualified to do this. Women statistically are going to read a job description or whatever and see all the things that they aren't qualified for. That's what they're going to focus on. And the gap between either where you fall theologically or whatever, there's a gap between what you think you're capable of and that. So how can you push past the sticky floor too?
That comment, what you just said, is the very reason we created Prepared.
Mm-hmm.
You better give people a quick what Prepared
is. So
Yeah,
Prepared is an EFCA equipping program. It's a 2-year program, 10 courses that women take to be prepared both to have a better understanding of theology as well as a better understanding of praxis and how they can minister in a variety of situations. So it's not preparing them for women's ministry, it's preparing women for ministry and leadership to help them in teaching and leading responsibilities. And one of the reasons we've created it is because there are many women who feel called into ministry, who want to be involved in the kingdom and want to partner in the kingdom, but they don't either have the resources or the time. Many of them are moms and they want to care for their kids, so they don't have the time to go to seminary, for instance, or to go get a 3-year degree. But Prepared gives them an introduction to all of those areas. And what you said, Emily, it's to help them close that gap and to believe that they're capable and to give them the training that can then infuse confidence in what God has called them to do and how he has wired them to do it.
Which is just so cool. I love that we have that available to people. I think there's still an issue of, so women go through that, there's still the issue of churches being receptive to these prepared, equipped women. What needs to change in our churches to make women in leadership feel welcomed and supported? Kind of regardless of where you fall theologically, our churches don't always reflect our theology just because of our hiring processes or, again, not fully equipping people to step into those leadership roles, even if they're available to them. So what can we do to make that happen?
And a lot of it goes back, because we are in a church, your theology is always going to frame what you do. Your theology should frame what you do. I mean, I'm a firm believer in that. I think where it gets messy is in the interpretation and the application. And so I think what we have to do is go back. Instead of looking at verses or to create a theology on verses that seem to prohibit things, let's create a theology, step back and look at God's story and what is his heart for people? What is his heart for the men and women that he has created? And I believe if we start with that and receive the fact that God created us differently, absolutely, but he also commissioned us to build his kingdom, to teach others, to go on that journey of faith together. And I think if we can start with that foundation, I believe then we can go into what I believe is a partnership mindset as we look at each other as brothers and sisters in Christ. And as brothers and sisters in Christ, we have been gifted to not only spread the gospel, but to encourage one another, to build one another up, to create a healthy body that reflects Christ as our head. And then we can go into a world with a healthy understanding of what it looks like to be male and female together. And our world needs that now more than ever. We are so confused. The younger generation is just confused, even about male and female. Mm-hmm. And so we as churches, if we can put aside maybe some of the things that we feel are restrictive and try to approach this conversation from how can I value you? How can I show you respect? I think that's the starting point. Then there are some other things that I think we have to do practically that invite women to use their gifts into non-traditional ways in our churches.
Mm-hmm.
This is a good spot for me to ask. All right, so I'm a lead pastor. You know, we have 2 campuses. I have females on staff and in key roles throughout our church. What can I do that can make it to value them, to make them feel more comfortable, to make this a healthy place for them in their leadership roles here? Like, what are some things that should be on my radar?
Well, it sounds like you've already taken first steps. You have women in key leadership roles. That is such a critical first step. And that's going to look differently in different churches depending on the size of the church. So if you are a larger church and you have paid roles that can be filled by qualified women, really look at women as being able to contribute. You know, don't look at that as, well, if I can't find a man for the job, I'll see if I have a woman that can do it. And if you're in a smaller churches where you may not have as many paid staff, what are the key lay roles that you can affirm women's leadership in that role? And so you are you're listening to what they have to say. And so for me, it's important though for women then to take the time to learn what it means to be effective in ministry. So let me just step back to the very beginning stages of my ministry. I read books. Now, granted, I like to read. Now we have podcasts. I mean, there are so many ways that you can get information. Read information about the church. And if you are a male leader in the church, a male pastor, when you give out information, like share that information, encourage the women and say, you know, I see this giftedness in you. I want you to read this and I want you to give me your input on it. I want your feedback so that you are helping stretch them as they are being trained and equipped. But then you're also saying to them, hey, I really want to hear what you have to say. It's not just, you know, what's the word I want? Face painting in a sense. It's not just something that is exterior. I really want to hear what you have to say, because you don't want just a token woman. Like, here's the token woman that we have in a leadership role. Right. Because she can't speak for all women, just like one man can't speak for all men.
Right.
So if you want to know what my druthers are, you like what my dream would be?
Yeah.
Yes.
To not mess with the theology, okay, and the theology of a man being the senior pastor, and I did qualify that by saying senior pastor, and that men should be elders. If we take those roles off the table, I believe all the other roles should be open to qualified men or women, believing that that's the partnership that is modeled. And I go radical and I say, so if your men are elders, let them eld. I don't know if that's a word, but
I love it. Well, let's make that
Get
a
to
thing.
the eld.
I really like it.
You like that?
I love
let
it.
them eld.
Yes.
Which may be holding on to the theology, holding the truth of the theology of the church and making sure that there isn't any heresy that comes in, perhaps dealing with some of the disciplinary issues that come up within a church context, but create a mixed gender partnership leadership team. That's not an elder, okay? They're not an elder, but they are key lay leaders, so that you have male and female key lay leaders who you're hearing from, and they are engaging the conversations that relate to the vision of the church and the mission of the church. Because then you're getting, I think, a more balanced perspective on how we can move the church forward.
I love that. Okay, so I'm going to ask a personal question. Does it bother you that pastor is not in your job title? Because what you do is, you are pastoring people. So I wondered if that bothers you.
There probably would have been a time that it bothers me, and there are times it still does. Mm-hmm. But a long time ago, I settled the issue by saying, I want to do whatever God has called me to do. That the most important thing here is, for me anyway, was to acknowledge that I felt like he had given me gifts that he wanted me to use to advance his kingdom. And if that meant, in order to keep people happy in the structures and systems of an organization, that I wasn't given the title pastor, then that wasn't going to stop me, and it wasn't going to impact me emotionally to keep me from doing what God had called me to do. Every now and then it bugs me.
Yeah.
Okay.
What is your, I don't think we covered this. What is your title at Hershey now? And your role? It's
Director of Spiritual Formation and Family Ministry.
And family,
it has
okay.
both components. And I am on the senior leadership team.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that was going to be my next question. Mm-hmm. I have found this to be true. I see it a lot. Unfortunately, the broader the scope of pastors that I work with, the more I see this, unfortunately. But I think sometimes people, and this doesn't just apply to pastors, but it does include pastors. People can hide bad character behind theology. I think it happens a lot. We see it, and it becomes more evident the more you look for fruit in conversation and love added to truth. I just think that a lot of times people can hide bad character, try to hide bad character behind their theology. And I see that. I see that in this issue. It seems to me that there are people that draw a stricter theological line maybe on the issue, but are still loving and valuing women and being respectful and cherish and finding ways to help them accomplish all that God has for them. But then I see just a real kind of chauvinistic attitude. But I see this chauvinistic attitude hiding behind theology. I don't think it's fair to the theology. I think it's an awful thing, especially from pastors. If you're not comfortable to answer, you can just say pass. Do you see that? And when it comes to the kind of like the conversations about women in ministry, have you experienced any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's rooted in fear more than anything else. I do. I think there's, I can't psychoanalyze everyone, but I can't help but think that the need to promote self, in a hierarchical fashion is rooted in something other than theology. Now, you can use your theology to support what you're saying, but I think the reality is all of us deal with ego. All of us deal with pride. And when we look at what God is trying to transform in us, a lot of times that's what's at the core. But if we have traditionally lived in a culture in the conservative church where the practice of male hierarchy is acceptable and is seen as a theological principle. And so I think with that being true, it's easy then for your own, whoever we are, to our own self, ego, pride, to then just really color how we play that out, how we interact, and how we relate to others.
It's just from a male perspective, I know that if I'm seeing that, then it has to be felt by women And there has to be some crushed spirits out there who have felt called to a role, whether that role is, vocational or not, but have been stomped on or emotionally gaslighted or shots taken by somebody who was in a position of authority, used theology as a shield, but really they were just hiding some bad character and insecurity and fear and a lack of a willingness to just love and embrace God's design. And that can be done no matter where you fall on the theology of women in ministry. At times, it has to be frustrating for women who are just trying to use their gifts because they love Jesus and they love people and they want to see the kingdom expanded. I've been extremely fortunate. My mother was very involved in ministry behind the scenes. She's with Jesus. She never held an actual position, but man, a little church grew insanely by her partnering with my dad in ministry, influencing everything. Her fingerprints are on everything. I'm just grateful for the women who have, especially like you, who have, the first people through the wall always get bloody. And I know you have probably suffered unfair and unjust wounds as you have kind of led in so many different ways a charge to just break through some of those walls. So I guess I'm saying thank you.
This episode is sponsored by EFCA East, a district of the Evangelical Free Church of America. EFCA East exists to help develop transformational churches among all people by helping leaders live well, lead well, and multiply. We're here to serve you, whether you're in one of the 6 states that make up EFCA East or not. You can find more from us at efcaeast.com. So, like Josh mentioned, I'm sure you have received a lot of probably some negative feedback in your lifetime in vocational ministry. And how do you respond to that in a gracious way?
Well, I'm not sure I'm always gracious either. I get angry at that.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. And then I go back to, again, like, what's behind that comment? Like, what is really stirring that comment? If you're not telling me that how I spoke or what I said was poorly done, then what's behind that? And then we do have to go to theology, and we say that gets back to everybody's line in the sand is different. And I don't know, I guess my biggest frustration is not knowing how to do anything about it. Not knowing how in some way to have a conversation that there's any kind of, I want to say, reconciliation and any kind of way to come to some middle ground where we can agree to disagree, but that that person doesn't feel like they have to offer their negative criticism about something that just is a result of me being a female.
So shifting more to the practical way, like of how male and female can work together in a healthy, safe way. I grew up in kind of the height of purity culture. Okay, so I have a lot of probably weird baggage from that about how males and females can work together well. But I think guardrails are healthy and boundaries are healthy because we are human and we make mistakes and we need those kind of guardrails. So like, has there been any principles that you've tried to adhere to in your work situations just to keep that all above board?
And I do think guardrails are important, but I also think we have to be careful that we're not driven by fear or that we don't make decisions about how to relate to each other that are based in fear. And just because something could happen doesn't mean that something will happen. And I also will say, I know plenty of circumstances where people put guardrails in place, but they still failed. They still made mistakes that they shouldn't have made. I do get frustrated with comments like, I will never go with a female/male coworker to lunch together or whatever. Like, I personally, and this is personal, don't set my boundaries that tight. So like, I have gone and do go to lunch with my senior pastor if we have something that we need to talk about. Like a lot of senior pastors will take their male staff members out and have lunch with them because there's a way of getting to know them and building relationship, but they won't take their female staff members. That again sets up this dualistic way of looking at the value and importance of the person. Now, I don't think anything's going to happen because you occasionally go to lunch in a public place with someone. If you are going somewhere where there's privacy and there's only two of you going, then I think that's a problem. And especially if there's an ongoing basis. So guardrails that I would put in place is like, I would not, in my own mind, if I would start wanting to be with a male coworker, and I would start thinking about how I can do that and more often, I'm going, wait a minute, something is going on that is inappropriate in my own thinking, and that's not right. The other thing I've always done is I've always told my husband, like who I'm having lunch with. Like, I went out with so and so, and this is what we did, and I'm just really open and honest with him. The reality is we are all responsible for our own integrity and our own walk with the Lord, and we've got to pay attention to that, because that's the best guardrail we can put in place. I think caution is necessary, but I absolutely don't think it should be prohibitive in the way that it helps a relationship grow and develop as coworkers.
Yeah. And I think for me, I think some of the baggage I bring in to this is that it was always communicated to me that it was my responsibility as a female. Like, I would be the one to cause the issue or to drag somebody down or be the cause of sin because I am a female. And I think it goes a long way. Like, the one way I think that men can do something to make women feel comfortable in ministry is to just make it clear that it's not like it is not your fault for being a woman. It's not you the reason there are guardrails. Are there any other kind of like paradigm shifts that you would say male leaders can, because I think a lot of them are well-meaning, but maybe just have not thought through what a female would feel like in this situation. So are there any other like mental shifts that men need to just kind of wrap their mind around in how to support and make women feel like they have a place at the table?
Okay, so just in general, not so much just
I mean,
guardrails
it can be guardrails or any other thing.
I would say this: we are still at a place in not just the free church, but I think in the evangelical church as a whole, where men still need to take the initiative in a lot of ways in how these conversations happen, because women aren't as sure about what they should do, because our history, the traditions that we have in the way men and women relate within the church, many women feel unsure about how to initiate those kinds of conversations, or and I use this term, I hope correctly, promote themselves, like even to say, I would like to do this, because there's a fear that they should wait, that if you're talking about a culture that's been steeped in top-down headship hierarchy, that they're not sure then how they should proceed. So if men can understand that, especially in that type of culture, they need to be they need to set the invitation. They need to be invitational. They need to reach out and invite women into that space where their voice is heard. And then once a culture is created, I think then it can be more reciprocal. So for instance, I really believe the culture that we have at Hershey, while we would not have a senior pastor as a woman, we would not have a female elder. Okay. And at this point, we wouldn't have even a woman given the pastoral title. All right. At least where we are now. But the working culture that we have, especially on our staff, is very collaborative and very reciprocal. So women have been invited to the table, and their contributions are expected. So there is a different level of expectations. And I think that's what we need to do in in our church cultures is begin to create the culture that there is an expectation that women will contribute, that it's not odd or unusual, but that it's normative, whether it's in paid positions, lay positions, or just working, as we work together. And I think at the very least, we should be creating that kind of culture, because that becomes a partnership culture.
As far as you know, for the EFCA, would it be okay for a church to give a woman a job title that had pastor in it, if it wasn't a lead pastor role?
Yeah, some of them have. We have women in the Free Church who have the role, the title of pastor in their role. We also have Free churches that have female elders. That's part of.
I feel great right now because I knew that. I knew that, and Emily did not know that.
Yeah.
Well, okay. Yeah. I think that's another example, a perfect example of the perception not reflecting the actual theology that we have. So
I have something that I think would be cool. And I was going to do this different, but now I'm going to just ask you to do it, Deb. First, we'll start with this. Like, I'm a lead pastor, senior pastor. Sounds so lame, but you can call me that if you want. What do you have to say to me and all the other, like, just one piece of advice to me and all the other leads out there that we can kind of like take from you?
I would say, if you have not already started to do so, look around for the women in your church who are gifted and have much to offer, and look for ways to give them opportunities to do that. Don't assume that maybe they're content in what might be roles that are acceptable roles. I'm just going to use that term. Because the issue is not can women serve. That is not an issue in any of our churches. It's where can they serve? Look for women that have teaching gifts, for instance. And that doesn't mean they have to be teaching from the stage on a Sunday morning. Some of our churches do. I mean, we do have churches in the Free Church where women preach on a Sunday morning. They are part of the preaching team. But I'm saying look for women that have those gifts and give them opportunities and encourage them, because again, many women may have the gifts, but they don't feel that they have the freedom or the confidence to use them. That's what I would say to senior pastors. And then as you're doing that, what you are modeling to your congregation is that we believe in affirming men and women to use their gifts in whatever roles they are equipped to do so.
It's what we're affirming to our children too. So here's the second part of that. To a young woman either involved in ministry or looking to get involved in ministry, what's your one piece of advice to them?
Listen to how God is speaking to you. Learn to discern his voice. I think that is critical. I think that's critical for all of us as believers. If we truly believe that we have the presence and power of the Holy Spirit, which was given to us, then we need to develop a posture of how to listen to that voice. There's too many other voices. I have a little card in my office, a little 3x5 card in my office and on my mirror in my bedroom that just says, to whose voice am I listening? And it's a reminder when I look at it to learn how to sort out the things that can keep me from really hearing what God has to say. And because young women growing up today have so many more conflicting and confusing messages that they are being given. And I really believe our churches need to start speaking to our young men and our young women about what it looks like to wholeheartedly follow Jesus and believe that he is calling them into his mission, whether that's vocationally or not. We are all being called into his mission. And so that's what I would say to a young woman. And if she's in any way sensing a call of God on her life in a vocational way, to posture herself to listen.
That's so great. Thank you so much for that.
Are there any books, resources that you would suggest for either pastors who want to learn how to do this well, or women who want to learn more about what the Bible says about their role in ministry?
Should have looked at my resources. I only have like 3 shelves full. That's it.
Uh-huh.
There's a book that we use in Prepared that I think is a really good resource called Women as Leaders in God's Mission,
Okay.
that I think is definitely a resource worth reading. There's another one that's actually written from a more complementarian perspective that's called Worthy. And that book is written both to men and women to really pay attention to how do we raise the level of value. Women are worthy. What does that look like? There's another one that deals with theology. And if you've already made up your mind, you won't want to read this book because the book is called Reclaiming the Ideal, and by Carol Osborne. It's Carroll. It's a man who has now passed away, but I honestly believe tried his best to present what I would call differing perspectives theologically on this issue, and then arrive at a legitimate understanding of the text as well as the application of it.
Ooh, okay. I really want to read that.
So Reclaiming the Ideal. I mean, I could give you more, but I think those are the ones that are good ones to get started with.
Okay. And talk to me about Prepare. Who is eligible to jump into that?
Okay, so any woman who is either in a position, is currently serving in a paid staff position or serving in a lay position, or just wants to be trained. So is saying, I believe that God has laid this on my heart. I want to know more. I want to be able to be better prepared to serve in my church. So it's open to any woman. Ages, I would say, I think the youngest woman we have right now is 24, and the oldest one is 72. So
I love that.
We've got quite a gap, quite an age, range. But what's important is the desire to learn and go through the courses. So like the courses range from how you lead in God's mission to understanding God's narrative overview of Scripture. And so you get that rootedness. Then there's this class on soul care for the ministry leader, one on hermeneutics, one on homiletics, one on spiritual formation, one on the theology of women in ministry, one on discipleship in a postmodern culture, ministering to women in pain. And then the last course is the understanding the doctrinal statement, the statement of faith for the free church. So it really has a breadth to it. And every class has homework and textbooks that you read. And the whole point of, I can tell you every woman that I've talked to, and now I've taught 3 cohorts. I will teach the 4th one in just a few weeks. Every woman that has gone through that has just talked about how it has given them confidence and how it has given them information that has equipped them both in their minds and their hearts, that they feel better equipped for ministry.
And I'm assuming it's online, right?
Yes, it's all done over Zoom. We have women from all over the country and some from around the world who are in Reach Global.
Oh, that's so cool.
Deb, thanks so much for this amazing conversation. I think I've already thanked you for your bravery, but I will thank you again for that. I really appreciate your voice. I've learned so much from you. You have benefited our ministry here a ton from previous conversations, from times where you've taken the stage and I've taken rabid notes. So I just want to thank you for this conversation. It's so important. And to all my fellow males in leadership who are especially senior pastors who are listening to this, our mouths betray our hearts. They just do. And I think we need to do a better job of not tolerating some of the little comments, sidebar conversations, assumptions that are made when women are just doing what God has called them to do in ministry. And it's time that we are just better about sharing love with our sisters who are just trying to expand the kingdom alongside us, and do a better job of valuing their voices. I think one of the things that needs to change, no matter your theological position, for males, for us men in leadership, is a softening of our hearts, better understanding of God's design, and how to communicate even the truth of your theological position on this issue with love. So I'm grateful for this conversation. I don't know if that rant makes any sense to anybody, but I think we can do way better, and we would not be able to without voices like yours, Deb, that really kind of a stand in the gap, even though it may be painful at times, to help the church become all that God intended it to be. So thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you to both of you. I have so enjoyed this time this morning. Thank you for your encouragement, and also just for listening and providing the platform, the space to have this conversation. Just thank you so much, not just for me personally, but for other women who desire to just use their gifts and advance the kingdom.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for that. We end our time here with a question that is just a question: what's saving your life right now? It doesn't have to be a Sunday school answer, although some of us have given Sunday school answers before. It can be something that God's just blessed you with, or a part of your life that really has been life-saving for you recently. I'm not going to go first. So do one of you want to take it?
I'm going to give two answers.
Oh, good. Okay. Perfect.
Because I'm going to give a serious answer and I'm going to give a fun answer.
Perfect.
My fun answer is chocolate. You know, like I can just default to chocolate.
Amen to that.
Preach.
Like this has been a hard meeting, or this has been a hard conversation. There's always chocolate in my office. So it's not just for me, it's for anybody on staff who can come in and default to chocolate.
Yep.
But remember, I do work in Hershey, Pennsylvania. So it's also
perfect.
Logical to have chocolate.
It's perfect.
So that is true. I will eat chocolate. The other thing are the rhythms that are in my life that have filled my soul. And I honestly, and I'm not trying to just, give the Sunday school answer. I honestly believe that without those rhythms, I don't know that I would have always persevered. And one of the rhythms that I use in my life now that just really does fill my soul is rhythms of surrender and remember. And every morning before I get out of bed, I will do different things, but it's an act of surrender of my day to the Lord. And every night I do something that is called the prayer of examine, but it's a remembering of the day. And bookending my day with that has just over the years changed the trajectory in a lot of ways of how I think and how I process.
I love that. Absolutely love that. Generally, I'm the weird one that has tends to be the non-serious, but so I am doing a chronological reading the Bible in a year this year, and I just finished Deuteronomy today. But when I was in the weeds of like Leviticus and Numbers, it was really helpful for me to be able to listen like while I was reading, just so that I could focus my mind. So that has been saving my life. And I highly recommend, so we are huge fans of the Jesus Storybook Bible in our household. I have 2 young kids, but even for Tim, my husband, and I, we've listened to it like countless times, read it to our, just it's so good. But the audiobook narrator for that, David Suchet, has also his story is just really cool. He was a late convert to Christianity, and it was just his goal to do a narration of the entire Bible. And so I have that on Audible, and he has a British accent and he just reads it phenomenally. So listening to him or reading me all the weird Levitical laws has been saving my life with that.
Those are good answers. Mine is, so it's show weekend. One of the first of our family's show weekends this weekend. So my 2 oldest are in drama productions in our local schools. So we have the high school one coming up this weekend and the middle school one. And it is just joy. It's just so much fun. A little nerve-wracking at times, but it's so much fun to watch them just do their thing. My 2 girls on stage. And so I get to do that tonight. Like, I'm really excited about that. And so it's been fun to have like that to look forward to. And it's also fun that after it, I don't really have to hear the show tunes anymore in my house.
What shows are they doing?
It's nonstop. My oldest is Crutchy in Newsies.
Newsies, oh, how
tonight.
fun.
Yeah. So she is rocking the Crutchy.
That's so fun.
So it's gonna be a lot of fun.
So
and
good.
And my middle girl, she is in Beauty and the Beast as Mrs. Potts.
Oh my gosh, how fun.
How cool is that?
That's amazing.
That's cool. Very cool.
So I'm got that terrified and excited and all those feelings, but it's been something that I've been looking forward to, and it's this morning I just woke up and I was like, man, I'm like happy, I'm like juiced up, what's going on?
Show day today. Show day. That's fun. Bring him the roses. That's really fun.
That's really cool.
Well, we don't have a slick way of saying goodbye on here because we just spend all of our energy on the content, and we have not come around to figuring out a cool outro for us. So listeners, man, we are so glad that you hung with us here. I'm just glad that you are listening. I hope this conversation was a blessing to you. And if it needed to rile you up, I hope it riled you up. And if it needed to be an encouragement, I hope it encouraged you. And in all things, man, keep pressing on and do it with love. And we're just going to say bye.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
The Church Chat podcast is for educational purposes only. We dive deep into important and sometimes sensitive conversations and topics about life in ministry. Please know that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are solely the views and the opinions of the guests and the hosts and do not necessarily represent the organizations that we work for. Nor should our views or opinions be considered a full perspective of circumstances that may be mentioned in this podcast. Our perspectives are limited, and so will be this podcast. What we hope to do is have conversations and spark greater conversations that will lead leaders and their organizations towards greater health. The Church Chat podcast is edited by Emily Gardner and produced by Emily Gardner and Josh Ott. The Church Chat podcast is supported by EFCA East, an Eastern District of the Evangelical Free Church of America, covering 6 states. EFCA East helps leaders live well, lead well, and multiply, helping churches find new vitality and multiply transformational churches on the East Coast. The EFCA is multiplying transformational churches among all people. For more information, visit efcaeast.com. We hope you enjoyed this podcast and can't wait to see you on the next Church Chat.